the Mahabharata of Krishna-Dwaipayana Vyasa. Translated into English prose from the original Sanskrit text by Pratap Chandra Roy C.I.E. This free ebook has been downloaded from holybooks.com. Vana Parva. Section 216, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Vaisampayana continued, the virtuous King Yudhishthira, having listened to this excellent religious discourse, again addressed himself to the Rishi Markandeya saying, why did the fire god hide himself in water in olden times, and why is it that Angiras of great splendor officiating as fire god, used to convey oblations during his dissolution? There is but one fire, but according to the nature of its action, it is seen to divide itself into many. O worshipful sir, I long to be enlightened on all these points, how the Kumara was born, how he came to be known as the son of Agni, the fire god, and how he was begotten by Rudra or Ganga and Kritika. O noble scion of Brigu's race, I desire to learn all this accurately as it happened. O great Muni, I am filled with great curiosity. Markandeya replied, in this connection this old story is cited by the learned, as to how the carrier of oblations, the fire god, in a fit of rage, sought the waters of the sea in order to perform a penance, and how the adorable Angiras transforming himself into the fire god, destroyed darkness and distressed the world with his scorching rays. In olden times, O long-armed hero, the great Angiras performed a wonderful penance in his hermitage, he even excelled the fire god, the carrier of oblations, in splendor, and in that state he illumined the whole universe. At that time the fire god was also performing a penance and was greatly distressed by Angiras's effulgence. He was greatly depressed, but did not know what to do. Then that adorable god thought within himself, Brahma has created another fire god for this universe. As I have been practicing austerities, my services as the presiding deity of fire have been dispensed with, and then he considered how he could re-establish himself as the god of fire. He beheld the great Muni giving heat to the whole universe like fire, and approached him slowly with fear. But Angiras said to him, do thou quickly re-establish yourself as the fire animating the universe, thou art well known in the three stable worlds and thou wast first created by Brahma to dispel darkness. Do thou, O destroyer of darkness, quickly occupy thine own proper place. Agni replied, my reputation has been injured now in this world. And thou art become the fire god, and people will know thee, and not me, as fire. I have relinquished my godhood of fire, do thou become the primeval fire and I shall officiate as the second or Prajapatyaka fire. Angiras replied, do thou become the fire god and the destroyer of darkness, and do thou attend to thy sacred duty of clearing people's way to heaven, and do thou, O Lord, make me speedily thy first child. Markandeya continued, hearing these words of Angiras, the fire god did as desired, and, O king, Angiras had a son named Vrihaspati. Knowing him to be the first son of Angiras by Agni, the gods, O Bharata, came and inquired about the mystery. And thus asked by the gods he then enlightened them, and the gods then accepted the explanation of Angiras. In this connection, I shall describe to thee religious sorts of fire of great effulgence which are here variously known in the Brahmanas by their respective uses. Thus ends the 216th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 217, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O ornament of Kuru's race, Angiras who was the third son of Brahma had a wife of the name of Subha. Do thou hear of the children he had by her. His son Vrihaspati, O king, was very famous, large-hearted and of great bodily vigor. His genius and learning were profound, and he had a great reputation as a counselor. Bhanumati was his firstborn daughter. She was the most beautiful of all his children. Angira's second daughter was called Raga. She was so named because she was the object of all creatures' love. Sinivali was the third daughter of Angiras. Her body was of such slender make that she was visible at one time and invisible at another, and for this reason she was likened to Rudra's daughter. Akismati was his fourth daughter. She was so named from her great refulgence. And his fifth daughter was called Havishmati, so named from her accepting Havis or oblations. The sixth daughter of Angiras was called Mahismati the pious. O keen-witted being, the seventh daughter of Angiras is known by the name of Manamati, who is always present at sacrifices of great splendor, and that worshipful daughter of Angiras, whom they call unrivaled and without portion, and about whom people utter the words Kuhu Kuhu, wonder, is known by the name of Kuhu. Thus ends the 217th in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 218, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, Vrihaspati had a wife, called Tara, belonging to the lunar world. By her, he had 6 sons partaking of the energy of fire, and 1 daughter. The fire in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are offered at the Purnamasya, and other sacrifices, was a son of Vrihaspati called Sanju. He was of great ascetic merit. At the Chaturmasya, Fomently, and Aswamedha, horse, sacrifices, animals are offered first in his honor, and this powerful fire is indicated by numerous flames. Sanju's wife was called Satya. She was of matchless beauty and she sprang from Dharma, righteousness, for the sake of truth. The blazing fire was his son, and he had 3 daughters of great religious merit. The fire which is honored with the first oblations at sacrifices is his first son called Bharadwaja. The second son of Sanju is called Bharata, in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are offered with the sacrificial ladle, called Shruk, at all the full moon, Purnamasaya, sacrifices. Beside these, 3 sons of whom Bharata is the senior, he had a son named Bharata and a daughter called Bharati. The Bharata fire is the son of Prajapati Bharata Agni, fire. And, O ornament of Bharata's race, because he is greatly honored, he is also called the Great. Veera is Bharadwaja's wife, she gave birth to Veera. It is said by the Brahmanas that he is worshipped like Soma, with the same hymns, with offerings of clarified butter. He is joined with Soma in the secondary oblation of clarified butter and is also called Ratha Prabhu, Rathadvana and Kumbheta. He begot a son named Siddhi by his wife Sarayu, and enveloped the son with his splendor, and from being the presiding genius of the fire sacrifice, he is ever mentioned in the hymns in praise of fire. And the fire Nishyavana praises the earth only, he never suffers in reputation, splendor and prosperity. The sinless fire Satya blazing with pure flame is his son. He is free from all taint and is not defiled by sin, and is the regulator of time. That fire has another name, Nishkriti, because he accomplished the Nishkriti, relief, of all blatant creatures here. When properly worshipped he vouchsafes good fortune. His son is called Swana, who is the generator of all diseases. He inflicts severe sufferings on people for which they cry aloud, and moves in the intelligence of the whole universe. And the other fire, Vrihaspati's third son, is called Viswajit by men of spiritual wisdom. The fire, which is known as the internal heat by which the food of all creatures is digested, is the fourth son of Vrihaspati known through all the worlds, O Bharata, by the name of Viswabhuk. He is self-restrained, of great religious merit, and is a brahmacharin, and he is worshipped by Brahmanas at the Paka sacrifice. The sacred river Gomati was his wife, and by her all religious-minded men performed their rites. And that terrible water-drinking sea fire called Vadava is the fifth son of Vrihaspati. This Brahmic fire has a tendency to move upwards, and hence it is called Urdhvabhag, and is seated in the vital air called Prana. The sixth sun is called the Great Swishtakrit, for by him oblations became Swishta, SW, excellently, and Ishta, offered, and the Udadhara oblation is always made in his honor. And when all creatures are claimed, the fire called Manayati becomes filled with fury. This inexorably terrible and highly irascible fire is the daughter of Vrihaspati, and is known as Swaha, and is present in all matter. By the respective influence of the three qualities of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, Swaha had 3 sons. By reason of the first she had a son who was equalled by none in heaven in personal beauty, and from this fact he was surnamed by the gods as the Kama fire. By reason of the second she had a son called the Amoga or invincible fire, the destroyer of his enemies in battle. Assured of success he curbs his anger, and is armed with a bow and seated on a chariot, and adorned with wreaths of flowers. From the action of the third quality she had a son, the great Yukta, the means of salvation praised by akin to 3 Yuktas. He is the originator of the great word, and is therefore known as the Samaswasa or the means of rest, salvation. Thus ends the 218th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 219, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, Yukta performed a severe penance lasting for many years, with the view of having a pious son equal unto Brahma in reputation. And when the invocation was made with the Vyariti hymns and with the aid of the 5 sacred fires, Kasyapa, Vasistha, Prana, the son of Prana, Chyavana, the son of Angiras, and Suvachaka, there arose a very bright energy force full of the animating creative principle, and of 5 different colors. Its head was of the color of the blazing fire, its arms were bright like the sun, and its skin and eyes were golden colored, and its feet, O Bharata, were black. Its 5 colors were given to it by those 5 men by reason of their great penance. This celestial being is therefore described as appertaining to 5 men, and he is the progenitor of 5 tribes. After having performed a penance for 10,000 years, that being of great ascetic merit produced the terrible fire appertaining to the P3s, mains, in order to begin the work of creation, and from his head and mouth respectively he created Vrihat and Ratantara, day and night, who quickly steal away life, etc. He also created Siva from his navel, Indra from his might, and wind and fire from his soul, and from his 2 arms sprang the hymns Udatta and Anudatta. He also produced the mind, and the 5 senses, and other creatures. Having created these, he produced the 5 sons of the P3s. Of these Pranidhi was the son of Vrihadratha. Vrihadratha was the son of Kasyapa. Banu was the godson of Chyavana, Saurabha, the son of Suvachaka, and Anudatta, the son of Prana. These 25 beings are reputed to have been created by him. Tapa also created 15 other gods who obstruct sacrifices. They are Sabhima, Bhima, Atabhima, Bhimavala, Avala, Sumitra, Mitravana, Mitasina, Mitravardhana, and Mitradaman and Surapravira, Vira, Suvka, Suravakas and Surantri. These gods are divided into 3 classes of 5 each. Footnote 1. In Hindu mythology there are no gods who destroy sacrifices. It is only the Asuras who do so. The Bodhvan translator renders this passage, 15 other gods belonging to Western nations or Asuras. It is noticeable that the beings that were denounced as Asuras by the Hindus were worshipped as gods, Asuras, by the followers of Zarathustra. 2. In connection with the names of these Mitra gods, it is to be remembered that Mitra was the name of the principal god of the ancient Persians. Narrator's note: follow the link in the description for more info on the conflict between Vedic Aryans and Iranians. The conflict between Vedic Aryans and Iranians. Indian Journal of History and Culture, Chennai, Autumn 2015. End of narrator's note. Located here in this world, they destroy the sacrifices of the gods in heaven, they frustrate their objects and spoil their oblations of clarified butter. They do this only to spite the sacred fires carrying oblations to the gods. If the officiating priests are careful, they place the oblations in their honor outside of the sacrificial altar. To that particular place where the sacred fire may be placed, they cannot go. They carry the oblation of their votaries by means of wings. When appeased by hymns, they do not frustrate the sacrificial rites. Vrihadutta, another son of Tapa, belongs to the earth. He is worshipped here in this world by pious men performing Agnihotra sacrifices. Of the son of Tapa who is known as Ratantara, it is said by officiating priests that the sacrificial oblation offered in his honor is offered to Mitravinda. The celebrated Tapa was thus very happy with his sons. Thus ends the 219th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 220, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, the fire called Bharata was bound by severe rules of asceticism. Pushtimati is another name of his fire, for when he is satisfied he vouchsafes Pushti, development, to all creatures, and for this reason he is called Bharata, or the cherisher. And that other fire, by name Siva, is devoted to the worship of Sakti, the forces of the presiding deity of the forces of nature, and because he always relieves the sufferings of all creatures afflicted with misery, he is called Siva, the giver of good. And on the acquisition of great ascetic wealth by Tapa, an intelligent son named Puranda was born to inherit the same. Another son named Ushma was also born. This fire is observed in the vapor of all matter. A third son Manu was born. He officiated as Prajapati. The Brahmanas who are learned in the Vedas, then speak of the exploits of the fire Sambhu. And after that the bright Avasatya fire of great refulgence is spoken of by the Brahmanas. Tapa thus created the 5 Ujaskara fires, all bright as gold. These all share the Soma drink in sacrifices. The great sun god when fatigued, after his day's labors, is known as the Prasanta fire. He created the terrible Asuras and various other creatures of the earth. Angiras, too, created the Prajapati Banu, the son of Tapa. He is also called Vrihad Banu, the great Banu, by Brahmanas learned in the Vedas. Banu married Supraja, and Vrihad Banu the daughter of Surya, the sun god. They gave birth to 6 sons, do thou hear of their progeny. The fire who gives strength to the weak is called Valada, or the giver of strength. He is the first son of Banu, and that other fire who looks terrible when all the elements are in a tranquil state is called the Manjuman fire. He is the second son of Banu. And the fire in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are enjoined to be made here at the Dasa and Paunamasya sacrifices, and who is known as Vishnu in this world, is the third son of Banu, called Angiras, or Dhritiman. And the fire to whom Vidindra, the Agrayana oblation is enjoined to be made is called the Agrayana fire. He is the 4th son of Banu. The 5th son of Banu is Agraha, who is the source of the oblations which are daily made for the performance of the Chaturmasya, monthly rites. And Stuva is the 6th son of Banu. Nisa was the name of another wife of that Manu who is known by the name of Banu. She gave birth to 1 daughter, the 2 Agnishomas, and also 5 other fire gods. The resplendent fire god who is honored with the first oblations in company with the presiding deity of the clouds is called Vaisvanara. And that other fire who is called the Lord of all the worlds is Viswapati, the 2nd son of Manu. And the daughter of Manu is called Swistakrit, because by oblations unto her one acquires great merit. Though she was the daughter of Hiranyakasipu, she yet became his wife for her evil deeds. She is, however, one of the Prajapatis. And that other fire which has its seats in the vital airs of all creatures and animates their bodies, is called Sanayata. It is the cause of our perceptions of sound and form. That divine spirit whose course is marked with black and white stains, who is the supporter of fire, and who, though free from sin, is the accomplisher of desired karma, whom the wise regard as a great rishi, is the fire Kapila, the propounder of the yoga system called Sankhya. The fire through whom the elementary spirits always receive the offerings called Agra, made by other creatures at the performance of all the peculiar rites in this world, is called Agrani. And these other bright fires, famous in the world, were created for the rectification of the Agnihotra rites when marred by any defects. If the fires interlap each other by the action of the wind, then the rectification must be made with the Ashtakpala rites in honor of the fire Suchi. And if the southern fire comes in contact with the two other fires, then rectification must be made by the performance of the Ashtakpala rites in honor of the fire Viti. If the fires in their place called Nivesa come in contact with the fire called Devagni, then the Ashtakpala rites must be performed in honor of the fire Suchi for rectification. And if the perpetual fire is touched by a woman in her monthly course, then for rectification the Ashtakpala rites must be performed in honor of the fire called Desuman. If at the time of the performance of this Agnihotra rites the death of any creature is spoken of, or if animals die, then rectification must be made with the performance of the Ashtakpala rites in honor of the Suraman fire. The Brahmana, who while suffering from a disease is unable to offer oblations to the sacred fire for 3 nights, must make amends for the same by performing the Ashtakpala rites in honor of the northern fire. He who has performed the Darsa and the Paunamasya rites must make the rectification with the performance of the Ashtakpala rites in honor of the Patikrit fire. If the fire of a lying-in room comes in contact with the perpetual sacred fire, then rectification must be made with the performance of Ashtakpala rites in honor of the Agniman fire. Thus ends the 228th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 221, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, Mudita, the favorite wife of the fire Swaha, used to live in water. And Swaha, who was the regent of the earth and sky, begat in that wife of his a highly sacred fire called Advanta. There is a tradition amongst learned Brahmanas that this fire is the ruler and inner soul of all creatures. He is worshipful, resplendent, and the lord of all the great Bhutas here. And that fire, under the name of Grihapati, is ever worshipped at all sacrifices and conveys all the oblations that are made in this world. That great son of Swaha, the great Adbhuta fire, is the soul of the waters and the prince and regent of the sky and the lord of everything great. His son, the Bharata fire, consumes the dead bodies of all creatures. His first kratu is known as Niyata at the performance of the Agnishtama sacrifice. That powerful prime fire, Swaha, is always missed by the gods, because when he sees Niyata approaching him he hides himself in the sea from fear of contamination. Searching for him in every direction, the gods could not once find him out, and on beholding Atavan the fire said to him, O valiant being, do thou carry the oblations for the gods. I am disabled from want of strength. Attaining the state of the red-eyed fire, do thou condescend to do me this favor. Having thus advised Atavan, the fire went away to some other place. But his place of concealment was divulged by the Finni tribe. Upon them the fire pronounced this curse in anger, You shall be the food of all creatures in various ways. And then that carrier of oblations spoke unto Atavan, as before. Though entreated by the gods, he did not agree to continue carrying their oblations. He then became insensible and instantly gave up the ghost. And leaving his material body, he entered into the bowels of the earth. Coming into contact with the earth, he created the different metals. Force and scent arose from his pus, the deodar pine from his bones, glass from his phlegm, the Marakata jewel from his bile, and the black iron from his liver. And all the world has been embellished with these three substances, wood, stone and iron. The clouds were made from his nails, and corals from his veins. And, O king, various other metals were produced from his body. Thus leaving his material body, he remained absorbed in spiritual meditation. He was roused by the penance of Brigu and Angiras. The powerful fire thus gratified with penance, blazed forth intensely. But on beholding the Rishi Atharvan, he again sought his watery refuse. At this extinction of the fire, the whole world was frightened, and sought the protection of Atharvan, and the gods and others began to worship him. Atharvan rummaged the whole sea in the presence of all those beings eager with expectation, and finding out the fire, himself began the work of creation. Thus in olden times the fire was destroyed and called back to life by the adorable Atharvan. But now he invariably carries the oblations of all creatures. Living in the sea and travelling about various countries, he produced the various fires mentioned in the Vedas. The river Indus, the 5 rivers of the Punjab, the Son, the Devika, the Saraswati, the Ganga, the Satakumbha, the Sarayu, the Gandaki, the Chamanvati, the Mahi, the Meda, the Medatithi, the 3 rivers Tamravati, the Vetravati, and the Kausiki, the Thamasa, the Narmada, the Godavari, the Vena, the Upavena, the Bhima, the Vajava, the Bharati, the Suprayoga, the Kaveri, the Marmara, the Tungavina, the Krishna-Vena and the Kapila. These rivers, O Bharata, are said to be the mothers of the fires. The fire called Adbhuta had a wife of the name of Priya, and Vibhu was the eldest of his sons by her. There are as many different kinds of Soma sacrifices as the number of fires mentioned before. All this race of fires, firstborn of the spirit of Brahma, sprang also from the race of Atri. Atri in his own mind conceived these sons, desirous of extending the creation. By this act, the fires came out of his own Brahmic frame. I have thus narrated to thee the history of the origin of these fires. They are great, resplendent, and unrivaled in power, and they are the destroyers of darkness. Know that the powers of those fires are the same as those of the Adbhuta fire, as related in the Vedas. For all these fires are one and same. This adorable being, the firstborn fire, must be considered as one. For like the Jyotishtama sacrifice he came out of Angira's body in various forms. I have thus described to thee the history of the great race of Agni, fires, who when duly worshipped with the various hymns, carry the oblations of all creatures to the gods. Thus ends the 221st section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 222, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O sinless scion of Kuru's race, I have described to thee the various branches of the race of Agni. Listen now to the story of the birth of the intelligent Kartikeya. I shall tell thee of that wonderful and famous and highly energetic son of the Adbhuta fire, begotten of the wives of the Brahmarshis. In ancient times the gods and Asuras were very active in destroying one another. And the terrible Asuras always succeeded in defeating the gods. And Purandara, Indra, beholding the great slaughter of his armies by them and anxious to find out a leader for the celestial host, thought within himself, I must find out a mighty person, who observing the ranks of the celestial army shattered by the Danavas, will be able to reorganize it with vigor. He then repaired to the Manasa mountains and was there deeply absorbed in thought of nature, when he heard the heart-rending cries of a woman to the effect, may someone come quick and rescue me, and either indicate a husband for me, or be my husband himself? Purandara said to her, Do not be afraid, lady. And having said these words, he saw Kesin, an Asura, adorned with a crown and make in hand, standing even like a hill of metals at a distance and holding that lady by the hand. Vasava addressed then that Asura, saying, Why art thou bent on behaving insolently to this lady? Know that I am the god who wields the thunderbolt. Refrain thou from doing any violence to this lady. To him Kesin replied, Do thou, O Sakra, leave her alone. I desire to possess her. Thinkest thou, O slayer of Paka, that thou shalt be able to return home with thy life? With these words Kesin hurled his make for slaying Indra. Vasava cut it up in its course with his thunderbolt. Then Kesin, furious with rage, hurled a huge mass of rock at him. Beholding that, he of 100 sacrifices rent it asunder with his thunderbolt, and it fell down upon the ground. And Kesin himself was wounded by that falling mass of rock. Thus sorely afflicted, he fled leaving the lady behind. And when the Asura was gone, Indra said to that lady, Who and whose wife art thou, O lady with a beautiful face, and what has brought thee here? Thus ends the 222nd section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 223, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. The lady replied, I am a daughter of Prajapati, the lord of all creatures, Brahma, and my name is Devasena. My sister Detyasena has this been ravished by Kesin. We two sisters with our maids habitually used to come to these Manasa mountains for pleasures with the permission of Prajapati. And the great Asura Kesin used daily to pay his court to us. Detyasena, O conqueror of Paka, listened to him, but I did not. Detyasena was, therefore, taken away by him, but, O illustrious one, thou hast rescued me with thy might. And now, O Lord of the Celestials, I desire that thou shouldst select an invincible husband for me. To this Indra replied, Thou art a cousin of mine, thy mother being a sister of my mother Dakshayani, and now I desire to hear thee relate thine own prowess. The lady replied, O hero with long arms, I am Avala, weak, but my husband must be powerful. And by the potency of my father's boon, he will be respected by gods and asuras alike. Indra said, O blameless creature, I wish to hear from thee, what sort of power thou wishest thy husband to possess. The lady replied, that manly and famous and powerful being devoted to Brahma, who is able to conquer all the celestials, asuras, yakshas, kinnaras, uragas, rakshasas and the evil-minded daityas, and to subdue all the worlds with thee, shall be my husband. Markandeya continued, on hearing her speech, Indra was grieved and deeply thought within himself, there is no husband for this lady, answering to her own description. And that god adorned with sun-like effulgence, then perceived the sun rising on the Udaya hill, and the great Soma, moon, gliding into the sun. It being the time of the new moon, he of 100 sacrifices, at the Rodra moment, observed the gods and asuras fighting on the sunrise hill. And he saw that the morning twilight was tinged with red clouds. And he also saw that the abode of Varuna had become blood red. And he also observed Agni conveying oblations offered with various hymns by Brigu, and Jairas, and others and entering the disk of the sun. And he further saw the 24 Parvas adorning the sun, and the terrible Soma also present in the sun under such surroundings. And observing this union of the sun and the moon and that fearful conjunction of theirs, Sakra thought within himself, this terrific conjunction of the sun and the moon forebodeth a fearful battle on the morrow. And the river Sindhu, Indus, too is flowing with a current of fresh blood and the jackals with fiery faces are crying to the sun. This great conjunction is fearful and full of energy, This union of the moon, Soma, with the sun and Agni is very wonderful. And if Soma giveth birth to a son now, that son may become the husband of this lady, and Agni also hath similar surroundings now, and he too is a god. If he too begetteth a son, that son may become the husband of this lady. With these thoughts that illustrious celestial repaired to the regions of Brahma, taking Devasena with him. And saluting the grandsire he said unto him, Do thou fix a renowned warrior as husband of this lady. Brahma replied, O slayer of Asuras, it shall be as thou hast intended. The issue of that union will be mighty and powerful accordingly. That powerful being will be the husband of this lady and the joint leader of thy forces with thee. Thus addressed, the Lord of the Celestials and the lady bowed unto him and then repaired to the place where those great Brahmanas, the powerful celestial rishis, Vasistha and others, lived. And with Indra at their head, the other gods also, desirous of drinking the Soma beverage, repaired to the sacrifices of those rishis to receive their respective shares of the offerings. Having duly performed the ceremonies with the bright blazing fire, those great-minded persons offered oblations to the celestials. And the Adbhuta fire, that carrier of oblations, was invited with mantras. And coming out of the solar disk, that lordly fire duly repaired thither, restraining speech. And, O chief of Bharata's race, that fire entering the sacrificial fire that had been ignited and into which various offerings were made by the rishis with recitations of hymns, took them with him and made them over to the dwellers of heaven. And while returning from that place, he observed the wives of those high-souled rishis sleeping at their ease on their beds. And those ladies had a complexion beautiful like that of an altar of gold, spotless like moonbeams, resembling fiery flames and looking like blazing stars. And seeing those wives of the illustrious Brahmanas with eager eyes, his mind became agitated and he was smitten with their charms. Restraining his heart, he considered it improper for him to be thus agitated. And he said unto himself, The wives of these great Brahmanas are chaste and faithful and beyond the reach of other people's desires. I am filled with desire to possess them. I cannot lawfully cast my eyes upon them, nor ever touch them when they are not filled with desire. I shall, therefore, gratify myself daily with only looking at them by becoming their Garhapatya, household, fire. Markandeya continued, the Adbhuta fire, thus transforming himself into a household one, was highly gratified with seeing those gold-complexioned ladies and touching them with his flames. And influenced by their charms he dwelt there for a long time, giving them his heart and filled with an intense love for them. And baffled in all his efforts to win the hearts of those Brahmana ladies, and his own heart tortured by love, he repaired to a forest with the certain object of destroying himself. A little while before, Swaha, the daughter of Daksha, had bestowed her love on him. The excellent lady had been endeavoring for a long time to detect his weak moments, but that blameless lady did not succeed in finding out any weakness in the calm and collected fire god. But now that the god had betaken himself to a forest, actually tortured by the pangs of love, she thought, as I too am distressed with love, I shall assume the guise of the wives of the 7 rishis, and in that disguise I shall seek the fire god so smitten with their charms. This done, he will be gratified and my desire too will be satisfied. Thus ends the 223rd section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 224, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O Lord of men, the beautiful Siva endowed with great virtues and an unspotted character was the wife of Angiras, one of the 7 rishis. That excellent lady, Swaha, at first assuming the disguise of Siva, sought the presence of Agni, unto whom she said, O Agni, I am tortured with love for thee. Do thou think it fit to woo me? And if thou dost not accede to my request, know that I shall commit self-destruction. I am Siva, the wife of Angiras. I have come here according to the advice of the wives of the other rishis, who have sent me here after due deliberation. Agni replied, How didst thou know that I was tortured with love, and how could the others, the beloved wives of the 7 rishis, of whom thou hast spoken, know this? Swaha replied, Thou art always a favorite with us, but we are afraid of thee. Now having read thy mind by well-known signs, they have sent me to thy presence. I have come here to gratify my desire. Be thou quick, O Agni, to encompass the object of thy desire. My sisters-in-law are awaiting me. I must return soon. Markandeya continued, Then Agni, filled with great joy and delight, married Swaha in the guise of Siva, and that lady joyfully cohabiting with him, held the same virile in her hands. And then she thought within herself that those who would observe her in that disguise in the forest, would cast an unmerited slur upon the conduct of those Brahmana ladies in connection with Agni. Therefore, to prevent this, she should assume the disguise of a bird, and in that state she should more easily get out of the forest. Markandeya continued, Then assuming the disguise of a winged creature, she went out of the forest and reached the white mountain begirt with clumps of heath and other plants and trees, and guarded by strange 7-headed serpents with poison in their very looks, and abounding with rakshasas, male and female pisachas, terrible spirits, and various kinds of birds and animals. That excellent lady, quickly ascending a peak of those mountains, threw that semen into a golden lake. And then assuming successively the forms of the wives of the high-souled 7 rishis, she continued to dally with Agni. But on account of the great ascetic merit of Arundhati and her devotion to her husband, Vasishtha, she was unable to assume her form. And, O chief of Kuru's race, the lady Swaha on the first lunar day threw 6 times into that lake the semen of Agni. And thrown there, it produced a male child endowed with great power. And from the fact of its being regarded by the rishis as cast off, the child born therefrom came to be called by the name of Skanda. And the child had 6 faces, 12 ears, as many eyes, hands, and feet, 1 neck, and 1 stomach. And it first assumed a form on the 2nd lunar day, and it grew to the size of a little child on the 3rd. And the limbs of Guha were developed on the 4th day. And being surrounded by masses of red clouds flashing forth lightning, it shone like the sun rising in the midst of a mass of red clouds. And seizing the terrific and immense bow which was used by the destroyer of the Asura Tripura for the destruction of the enemies of the gods, that mighty being uttered such a terrible roar that the 3 worlds with their mobile and immobile divisions became struck with awe. And hearing that sound which seemed like the rumbling of a mass of big clouds, the great Nagas, Chitra and Airavata, were shaken with fear. And seeing them unsteady, that lad shining with sun-like refulgence held them with both his hands. And with a dart in another hand, and with a stout, red-crested, big cock fast secured in another, that long-armed son of Agni began to sport about, making a terrible noise. And holding an excellent conch shell with 2 of his hands, that mighty being began to blow it, to the great terror of even the most powerful creatures. And striking the air with 2 of his hands, and playing about on the hilltop, the mighty Mahasena of unrivaled prowess, looked as if he were on the point of devouring the 3 worlds, and shone like the bright sun god at the moment of his ascension in the heavens. And that being of wonderful prowess and matchless strength, seated on the top of that hill, looked on with his numerous faces directed towards the different cardinal points, and observing various things, he repeated his loud roars. And on hearing those roars, various creatures were prostrate with fear. And frightened and troubled in mind, they sought protection. And all those persons of various orders, who then sought the protection of that god, are known as his powerful Brahmana followers. And rising from his seat, that mighty god allayed the fears of all those people, and then drawing his bow, he discharged his arrows in the direction of the white mountain. And with those arrows the hill Krauncha, the son of Himavat, was rent asunder. And that is the reason why swans and vultures now migrate to the Sumeru mountains. The Krauncha hill, sorely wounded, fell down uttering fearful groans. And seeing him fallen, the other hills too began to scream. And that mighty being of unrivaled prowess, hearing the groans of the afflicted, was not at all moved, but himself uplifting his make, yelled forth his war whoop. And that high-souled being then hurled his make of great lustre and quickly rent in twain one of the peaks of the white mountain. And the white mountain being thus pierced by him was greatly afraid of him, and dissociating himself from the earth fled with the other mountains. And the earth was greatly afflicted and bereft of her ornaments on all sides. And in this distress, she went over to Skanda and once more shone with all her might. And the mountains too bowed down to Skanda and came back and stuck into the earth. And all creatures then celebrated the worship of Skanda on the 5th day of the lunar month. Thus ends the 224th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 225, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, when that powerful, high-souled, and mighty being was born, various kinds of fearful phenomena occurred. And the nature of males and females, of heat and cold, and of such other pairs of contraries, was reversed. And the planets, the cardinal points and the firmaments became radiant with light, and the earth began to rumble very much. And the rishis even, seeking the welfare of the world, while they observed all these terrific prodigies on all sides, began with anxious hearts to restore tranquility in the universe. And those who used to live in that Chitraratha forest said, "This very miserable condition of ours hath been brought about by Agni cohabiting with the 6 wives of the 7 rishis." Others again who had seen the goddess assume the disguise of a bird said, "This evil hath been brought about by a bird." No one ever imagined that Swaha was the authoress of that mischief. But having heard that the newborn male child was hers, she went to Skanda and gradually revealed to him the fact that she was his mother. And those 7 rishis, when they heard that a son of great power had been born to them, divorced their 6 wives with the exception of the adorable Arundhati, because all the dwellers of that forest protested that those 6 persons had been instrumental in bringing forth the child. Swaha too, O king, said again and again to the 7 rishis, saying, "Ye ascetics, this child is mine, your wives are not his mother." The great Muni Viswamitra had, after the conclusion of the sacrifices of the 7 rishis, followed unseen the god of fire, while the latter was tortured with lust. He, therefore, knew everything as it happened, and he was the first to seek the protection of Mahasena. And he offered divine prayers to Mahasena, and all the 13 auspicious rites appertaining to childhood, such as the natal and other ceremonies, were all performed by the great Muni in respect of that child. And for the good of the world, he promulgated the virtues of the 6-faced Skanda, and performed ceremonies in honor of the cock, the goddess Sakti, and the first followers of Skanda. And for this reason he became a great favorite of the celestial youth. That great Muni then informed the 7 rishis of the transformations of Swaha and told them that their wives were perfectly innocent. But though thus informed, the 7 rishis abandoned their spouses unconditionally. Markandeya continued, the celestials having heard of the prowess of Skanda, all said to Vasava, "O Sakra, do thou kill Skanda without delay, for his prowess is unbearable. And if thou dost not exterminate him, he will conquer the 3 worlds with ourselves, and overpowering thee, will himself become the mighty lord of the celestials." Perplexed in mind, Sakra replied unto them, "This child is endowed with great prowess. He can himself destroy the creator of the universe, in battle putting forth his might. I venture not, therefore, to do away with him. To this the gods replied, Thou hast no manliness in thee, in that thou talkest in this manner. Let the great mothers of the universe repair today to Skanda. They can master at will any degree of energy. Let them kill this child. It shall be so. The mothers replied. And then they went away. But on beholding that he was possessed of great might, they became dispirited, and considering that he was invincible, they sought his protection and said unto him, Do thou, O mighty being, become our adopted son. We are full of affection for thee and desirous of giving thee suck. Lo, the milk oozes from our breasts. On hearing these words, the mighty Mahasena became desirous of sucking their breasts, and he received them with due respect and acceded to their request. And that mightiest of mighty creatures then beheld his father Agni come towards him. And that god, who is the doer of all that is good, was duly honored by his son, and in company with the mothers, he stayed there by the side of Mahasena to tend him. And that lady amongst the mothers who was born of anger, with a spike in hand kept watch over Skanda even like a mother guarding her own offspring, and that irascible red-colored daughter of the sea, who lived herself on blood, hugged Mahasena in her breast and nursed him like a mother. And Agni, transforming himself into a trader with a goat's mouth and followed by numerous children, began to gratify that child of his with toys in that mountain abode of his. Thus ends the 225th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 226, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, the planets with their satellites, the rishis and the mothers, Agni and numerous other blazing courtiers and many other dwellers of heaven of terrible mien, waited on Mahasena along with the mothers. And the illustrious sovereign of the gods, desirous of victory but believing success to be doubtful, mounted his elephant Airavata and attended by the other gods advanced towards Skanda. That mighty being, followed by all the celestials, was armed with his thunderbolt. And with the object of slaying Mahasena, he marched with terrible celestial army of great splendor, sounding their shrill war cry and furnished with various sorts of standards, with warriors encased in various armor and armed with numerous bows and riding on various animals. When Mahasena beheld the gloriously decked Sakra, attired in his best clothes, advancing with the determination of slaying him, he too on his part advanced to meet that chief of the celestials. O Partha, the mighty Vasava, the lord of the celestials, then uttered a loud shout to encourage his warriors, and marching rapidly with the view of killing Agni's son, and praised by three dasas and great rishis, he at length reached the abode of Kartikeya. And then he shouted out with other gods, and Guha too in response to this, uttered a fearful war cry resembling the roaring of the sea. On hearing that noise, the celestial army behaved like an agitated sea, and was stunned and fixed to the spot. And that son of Pavaka, the fire god, beholding the gods come near to him with the object of killing him, was filled with wrath, and gave out rising flame of fire from within his mouth. And these flames destroyed the celestial forces struggling on the ground. Their heads, their bodies, their arms and riding animals were all burnt in that conflagration, and they appeared all on a sudden like stars displaced from their proper spheres. Thus afflicted, the god renounced all allegiance to the thunderbolt, and sought the protection of Pavaka's son, and thus peace was again secured. When he was thus forsaken by the gods, Sakra hurled his thunderbolt at Skanda. It pierced him on the right side, and, O great king, it passed through the body of that high-souled being. And from being struck with the thunderbolt, there arose from Skanda's body another being, a youth with a club in hand, and adorned with a celestial amulet. And because he was born on account of the piercing of the thunderbolt, he was named Visakha. And Indra, when he beheld that another person looking like the fierce destroying fire god had came into being, was frightened out of his wits and besought the protection of Skanda, with the palms of his hands joined together, as some mark of respect. And that excellent being Skanda, bade him renounce all fear, with his arm. The gods were then transported with joy, and their hands too struck up. Thus ends the 226th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 227, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, now hear of those terrible and curious-looking followers of Skanda. A number of male children came into being when Skanda was struck with the thunderbolt, those terrific creatures that steal, spirit away, little children, whether born, or in the womb, and a number of female children too of great strength were born to him. Those children adopted Visakha as their father. That adorable and dexterous Bhadrasaka, having a face like that of a goat, was at the time of the battle, surrounded by all his sons and daughters whom he guarded carefully in the presence of the great mothers. And for this reason the inhabitants of this earth call Skanda the father of Kumaras, little children. Those persons who desire to have sons born to them, worship in their places the powerful Rudra in the form of the fire god, and Uma in the form of Swaha. And by that means they are blessed with sons. The daughters begotten by the fire god, Tapa, went over to Skanda, who said to them, "What can I do for you?" Those girls replied, "Do us this favor, by thy blessing, may we become the good and respected mothers of all the world." He replied, "Be it so." And that liberal-minded being repeated again and again, "Ye shall be divided into Siva and Asiva." And the mothers then departed, having first established Skanda's sonship, Kaki, Halima, Malini, Vrinhila, Aya, Pulila and Vaimitra. These were the 7 mothers of Sisu. They had a powerful, red-eyed, terrific, and very turbulent son named Sisu, born by the blessing of Skanda. He was reputed as the 8th hero, born of the mothers of Skanda. But he is also known as the 9th, when that being with the face of a goat is included. Know that the 6th face of Skanda was like that of a goat. That face, O king, is situated in the middle of the 6th, and is regarded constantly by the mother. That head by which Bhadrasaka created the divine energy, is reputed to be the best of all his heads. O ruler of men, these virtuous wonderful events happened on the 5th day of the bright half of the lunar month, and on the 6th, a very fierce and terrific battle was fought at that place. Thus ends the 227th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe to be notified of when new audiobooks are uploaded. Thank you for listening and learning. Shanti.